of the Department of Botany, on behalf of the Department of Botany, University of Calcutta, and the Archana Sharma Foundation of Calcutta, welcome you all to this joyous occasion of the 5th Professor Archana Sharma and Professor A.K. Sharma Oration. We are all ecstatic, I'm sure, to be back again to the offline mode after the long online hibernation. Can I request the head, Department of Botany, University of Calcutta, Professor Binay Chaube, to please deliver the welcome address.
Thank you very much, Monica. Respected Professor, our guest speaker for the day, Honorable Majindar, sir, Professor Sampadas, Sharma for Madam Anita Mukherjee, Prof. Sarita Kundu, all my colleagues, my guests, Mrs. Scholars, and my dear students. I welcome you all in this Archana Sharma and A.K. Sharma Oration lecture on behalf of the Department of Botany as well as the Foundation. Tradition of very vibrant tradition of lecture. For the last 2 years, we have seen that there was total stagnancy on the offline courses, offline lectures, offline meetings. So this is perhaps the first time we are meeting after 2 years. Even though in the last 2 years we tried to maintain the vibrancy of the department by some webinars, and I do remember that in the first lecture in our webinar series, we have the same Honorable Professor Syamal Roy as a speaker, Syamal Roy as a speaker, and I had the opportunity to welcome him at that time also. But that was a webinar, and now we are seeing him here physically, and I'm sure that we will be benefited by this. And of course, we all realized in the last 2 years that no matter what we learn on online mode, the quality of teaching, research, lectures when we go offline is entirely different. The person-to-person interaction, which was missing for the last 2 years, started again. So I congratulate Archana Sharma Foundation, and of course I will take this opportunity to invite other foundations also which are running the Department of Botany to please arrange such offline lectures. It is started. We don't need to wait again for anybody or for any further guidelines from the government. We have started in the offline mode. Please do arrange the lecture series in the department. So with these words, I welcome all of you, and I'm sure that we are going to have a very interesting talk here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Chaube, for your support and encouragement that makes events like this possible. Thank you. Now I request Professor Anita Mukherjee, Vice President of Archana Sharma Foundation of Calcutta, to share her opening remarks for today's session.
Eminent scientists, friends, dear students, research scholars, and others who are listening to us on the offline mode, I welcome you all to the 5th Archana Sharma, Professor Archana Sharma and Professor Arun Kumar Sharma oration to be delivered by an exceptionally erudite personality, Professor Syamal Roy, who is working at present as an ICMR Emeritus Scientist at the CSIR Institute of Chemical Biology, Kolkata. Professor Amita Pal, the President of the Society of the Foundation, could not be with us due to her personal illness or health issues, as I should say. But she has already, as we can see, has joined offline. Online. And it's good to see old faces and new faces, especially the students in this oration. This annual event is being organized in honor of our two great teachers, Professor Archana Sharma and Professor Sharma, in collaboration with the Department of Botany, University of Calcutta. The foundation was established in the year 2009 by our sir, late Professor Sharma, and his associates in memory of Professor Mrs. Archana Sharma, whom we all call as Didi. The members of the foundation, under the leadership of a president, are committed to bringing out the journal, the Nucleus, an international journal on cytology and molecular biology, being published by Springer Nature India at present. And we are also involved in supporting the educational needs of students from weaker sections of the society, especially the girl child, as per our vision of our mentors. In addition, the foundation conducts annual orations, workshops, seminars, and also conferences, and also supports other scientific bodies also in organizing the same for disseminating scientific knowledge. I would request you all to go through the website, which has been recently launched, to see the activities of the foundation and help us in moving forward and improving fulfilling the dreams of our mentors. With these words, I would end my address, and I would request you who are eagerly waiting to enjoy the talk, 2 Summers Rambling Thoughts in Mental Landscape during Pandemics by Professor Syamal Roy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Mukherjee, for this look into ASFC and its activities, and for kick-starting today's session. It is a privilege for me to be tasked with the job of introducing such a personality as the speaker of the day, Professor Syamal Roy. I was a bit overwhelmed where to start, but then I consoled myself that whatever I say would be, woefully inadequate to illuminate every facet of his work. Nonetheless, I will follow the beaten track and begin at the beginning. Professor Roy did his PhD in biochemistry from the University of Calcutta, and then he went on to do his postdoctoral studies at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He then came back to India and joined the CSIR Indian Institute of Chemical Biology in 1990 and embarked on a very illustrious career in research, primarily on the immunobiology of leishmaniasis. In his long and rewarding career, Professor Roy has set exemplary milestones of research in his chosen field, successfully completing numerous research grants and publishing highly cited research papers in reputed national and international peer-reviewed journals. He is the fellow of the Indian National Science Academy, fellow of the Indian Academy of Sciences, fellow of National Academy of Sciences, and he is also the recipient of the very prestigious J.C. Bose Fellowship of the Department of Science and Technology, Government of India. He is the former Vice Chancellor of the Kuch Bihar Panchanan Verma University and the former Professor and Dean at the National Institute of Pharmaceutical Education and Research, Kolkata. Currently, he is the ICMR Emeritus Scientist, CSIR Indian Institute of Chemical Biology. Professor Roy has made substantial contributions in the areas of immunoprophylactic and immunotherapeutic approaches against leishmaniasis. His research outcomes are profound and are leading the way in combating a number of studies on drug resistance and pathogen interactions around the world. The most intriguing aspect of Professor Roy's antecedents is actually his contribution as a science communicator, and his popular science writers and lectures are indeed a pleasure to be an audience of. Many of us remember his previous lectures here and in this very hall when he took us through times and places, science and geography, weaving his amazing tale. It is indeed a pleasure and a privilege to have him with us today to deliver the 5th Professor Archana Sharma and Professor A.K. Sharma Oration. Without any more ado, I would request Professor Syamal Roy to please take the podium. And I would just make a small excuse, if you may. This is the first time we are doing it online and offline as well. There might be a few technological glitches, so please bear with us. Thank you. Slide. Mr. Mondal, can we have it in full screen mode?
Thank you. So first of all, let me start with a tribute to the two legendary Indian scientists with international fame, Professor Archana Sharma and Professor Arun Kumar Sharma. And both of them really guided extraordinarily talented scientists, and they are contributing in the areas of botany and different aspects, both nationally and internationally. And it's a very difficult job to get the essence of these two personalities because their contribution is truly extraordinary. And I don't think I qualify to really talk about these two important personalities of Indian science. I thank organizers for giving me this opportunity for this prestigious oration. Professor Archana Sharma, recipient of Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Award, CSIR 1976. And she was the member of all the Indian academies. And President of India conferred upon her the Padma Bhushan in 1984. Professor Arun Kumar Sharma, recipient of Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Prize of CSIR in 1967. He was the member of all the academies in India, President of the Indian National Science Academy, Chairman of CSIR Plant Research Committee, Chairman CSIR Biological Research Committee, Member CSIR Governing Body, and Padma Bhushan 1983. And Sharma became synonymous with the plant chromosome investigation in India as well as abroad. Now, these two scientists are of global fame, and they published one book, Chromosomal Technique, I think sometime in 74 or 75. Anandabajar wrote a very big article on this book, Chromosome Technique. I still remember that was published in Anandabajar. And so this textbook is widely used in Indian scenario as well as abroad. So picture showing, I took it from Current Science, Professor Sharma with the different members of the nucleus, the journal that is being published by Professor Sharma and his colleagues, and these are the different members of that committee. And Professor Archana Sharma in the Indian Academy of Science meeting in 1981. And then Professor Sharma and Dr. Archana Sharma, Arun Sharma at the Kaira Institute of Biological Sciences in Japan, 1981. Professor Sharma, when he was the president of the Indian National Science Academy, welcoming Mrs. Gandhi at the INSA office in 1984 as a part of the Golden Jubilee celebration of INSA on 16 January 1984. And also you can see Professor M.G.K. Menon is looking on. And the picture below, Professor Sharma with the different presidents of the different academies of the Asian academies And then Professor Sharma on the right is in the department. And in the bottom, Professor Sharma at the time of Indian Science Congress, while with the other scientists on the plant science symposium during the Indian Science Congress. Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. It's okay.
It can minimize for it.
So, as I mentioned before, Professor Sharma at the INSA office welcoming Mrs. Gandhi for the Golden Jubilee celebration of INSA. And below is Professor Sharma with the president of other academies in Asia, Professor Sharma in the Department of Botany, and below is the Professor Sharma with the Plant Science Symposium at the 100th year of Indian Science Congress that was organized in Calcutta in 2013. During Indian Science Congress, Professor Sharma was being felicitated by Manju Sharma, then Secretary of the Department of Biotechnology. And the picture, you can see Dr. Jha, as well as Renu Sharup also available in this picture. Now, the glimpses of scientific contribution of Professor Sharma and Sharma. And you can see that quietly how extraordinarily important science he had done. That was published in 1951, Nature, that trichloric acid and fuel-gen staining. And this unique technique he had developed for staining the chromosome. And this was published in 1951 in Nature. Basically, his area of research primarily diversing around the different area of chromosomes and chromosome staining and characterization of the number of chromosomes in the different plants. So this another paper came out in Nature in 1952, Structural Heterogeneity of Cypra, which is a kind of bulbous plant. And it was initially difficult to detect the number of chromosomes. So by his unique technique that he had developed, and one can determine the number of chromosomes in that given species of plant. Then another paper published, I think it is 1955, the new technique for study of chromosome in palm, because there are a lot of controversies about the number of chromosomes in the plant palms. And he actually developed the unique technique for, yes. Okay. So he actually defined the number of chromosomes in the plant by exploiting the technique he had developed. Then another paper came out in 1956, fixity of chromosome number in plants, again in Nature. That fixity of chromosome number in plants, because there are a lot of variation in the number of chromosomes in the plant. So he developed unique technique by which number of chromosomes could be identified quite nicely. And another paper came out, I think 1957 or 59, structural heterogeneity of Cypra, that is another bulbous kind of plant. And what type of heterogeneity one can see in the chromosome number based on whether it's the mitotic state or the meiotic stage, the chromosome number appeared to be basically technology that really unable to define the number of chromosomes. So this is also another paper in Nature. Then this is another paper by Professor Archana Sharma, tumor production in plants by plant extracts. Basically, she have shown that certain kind of alkaloids, and that can induce some kind of tumor in plants. And actually that gave a good platform to study different types of material and their ability, how it can really prevent the tumor formation. This is another paper in Nature by Professor Sharma, and the chromosome breakage with the plant pigments. Basically, he could show very clearly that the chlorophyll is an important pigment, and that can cause the chromosome breakdown. So these are the kind of, you can see that quietly he has published so many papers in Nature. So quietly, sitting in quietly, he was publishing so much publications in Nature. It's a kind of truly extraordinarily scientist that I can think of, that quietly he has published so many papers in Nature. So my association with Professor A.K. Sharma. Professor Sharma served as the chairman of the CSIR Constituted Committee for Research on Tea, because CSIR was willing that if we can really compare the efficacy of Indian tea on green tea, so therefore we can increase the export of Indian tea to abroad. So Professor Sharma was the chairman of that committee. I was the convener. So therefore I had the numerous opportunities to interact with him during those meetings. And many a times he used to address some of the PhD students, and at one time he talked about epigenetics and inheritance. I was kind of mesmerized by his talk and really how epigenetics can really influence the inheritance. And in another address, he talked about the designer baby and not just natural selection, by doing creating natural babies, whether we really define the natural selection process. The book on the history of science in India, jointly published by Nasi Allahabad and Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture. At the early stage, I was associated publishing at that book. So therefore, I had numerous opportunities to interact with him over the years, but I never had the privilege of interacting with him. I came to know about that work through our colleague. So what I'm going to talk about, so what I decided to talk about, because during pandemics, I was kind of felt some kind of inner anxiety. And looking at the evening, I was looking along the road, hardly there is any people. It's a lot of few dogs, stray dogs here and there. And I was facing a lot of inner anxieties and trying to really express my inner anxiety. So I started writing poems. And also, I started to read a lot of neurobiology because I had deep-rooted interest in studying neurobiology. And I read important autobiographies, a lot of important scientists like Raman J. Kahal, many other good scientists, their autobiographies, and became interested in neurobiology and also started writing poems. So therefore, I thought that when Professor Sharma did a lot of work with the DNA, to be in tune with his notion, I thought I'll talk about something about the DNA, epigenetics, inheritance, and how it is being transmitted. Epigenetic modification can be transmitted through inheritance. So what did I do during pandemics? I tried to draw a portrait of inner anxiety. I faced a lot of anxiety because nobody on the street. I felt myself, I felt alone. So a lot of anxiety started to hover around in my mind, and tried to navigate into mysticism, creativity, and driving forces of such enterprises. I tried to really navigate into it, dwelling with a recurrent theme which is not definable. So anxiety one cannot express. Sometimes it is very difficult to express. And tried to put my voice by writing poems. So I tried to express my inner landscape by writing poems, and imagined about approaching the unapproachable, because so many things, if we think about dream or many other issues that comes up, it is very difficult to explain. It is unapproachable. So DNA, epigenetics, neurobiology, the central theme of my narrative. So basically, I'm in tune with the theme of Professor Sharma's DNA. I thought I will talk about it, how it can be inherited. So I would like to talk about things that beyond the language, because some of the imaginary dream sequences, surrealistic thoughts, etc., I'll basically try to talk about. So basically, we are trying to get into the inner space or inner landscape. I wrote a short poem. The poets imagine, philosophers think, no one can see, contours of inner self, images cohere together, echoes between memory and imagination, search from inner dimension in ever-changing contour. So we are trying to get into this inner landscape, and no one can see, no one can really visualize our inner self. And I tried to get into this inner self. So voices of the inner landscape. Life is about creating memories, because whatever the afferent impulses are coming, it turns out to be memory. It could be good memory, it could be bad memory, it could be anything. And that reverberates at a certain point of time when we are exposed to some kind of unnatural environment. So voyages to inner landscape. Life is about creating memories, accumulates endless barrage of information perceived by sensory organs, sculpt images of infinite contour through complex neuronal connectivity embedded in space and definite context, somewhere in deep, in the soul, within the silent endurance, lasting and multiform imprint, all rambling thoughts, layer by layer, clinching a permanent residence, no mechanism to erase. Whatever memories we have, we cannot erase. We can forget for a short period of time, but it comes back. So memories definitely we cannot erase. It stays for rest of our life, whatever afferent input we get into the sensory system. So when I started reading neurobiology, because I studied physiology, so therefore I know a lot of neuronal connectivity and etc. So while Professor Sharma Ochoa came to Calcutta, Professor Bhaduri, who was the then director of the institute, he asked me to take Professor Ochoa to different places. So I took him to Indian Museum, I took him to Belur Mott, and many other places. So in course of my discussion with Professor Ochoa, he came as a guest of CSIR. He is the recipient of Nobel Prize 1968, Physiology and Medicine. So in Madrid, his professor was Golgi as well as Cajal. They are the professors. So I came to know a lot about their life, his interaction with Golgi and Cajal. They are their professors at Madrid in medical school. So tribute to two amazing scientists. Camellia Golgi made nerve cell visible because he discovered the stain, Golgi stain. So using the Golgi stain, one can visualize the neuronal connectivity, etc. So Camellia Golgi made nerve cell visible. Ramon J. Cajal revealed it further. Smooth, triangle, stellate appearance, many tiny hands holding one another, forms a white mass called brain. Presumably the site of consciousness, reveals a dancing world of beauty and ugly through line, contour, colors, forms, verses, and sounds, evokes sensation of thrill and chill, as in musical score of Beethoven 9 versus Mahler's 9, internal sensation of incommunicable form. So if you listen to Beethoven's 9th Symphony, you can really go to the war. It is so powerful. But on the other hand, if you listen to the Mahler's 9th Symphony, it is so painful and one cannot really see the inner sensation of pain. And there is a book written by Louis Thomas, Late Night Thoughts on Listening to Mahler's 9th Symphony. Basically, the sensation of inner sensation of chill, how it comes out. So give a spectrum. Now, there is a nature issue describing how our brain is sensing the simple little score that is written on a piece of paper. In one case, you can go to the war. In other case, you start crying. So what is the spectrum? How this vibration is really translated in your brain. And in one case, you are kind of go to the war. In other case, you started crying. So we do not know actually how our brain is sensing this kind of differences and what are the centers in the brain that can really define or distinguish these two types of sensation. So the top one is Golgi, and the bottom one is Ramon J. Cajal. Cajal was also professor of Sharma Ochoa while they're studying in medicine at Madrid. So this is Ramon J. Cajal's autobiography, Recollections of My Life, and one should read this book. It is wonderful to read this book. I usually read a lot of autobiographies, but two autobiographies really made a long-lasting impression on me. One is Ramon J. Cajal's Recollections of My Life, and another is Ronald Ross's autobiography, Memoir. And these two autobiographies really made a lasting impression in my mind. And if you read, this is in the, you can see here, this, so this is the hand-drawn picture of neuronal connectivity. because Kahal was interested to go to an art school, but his father drove him to go to medical school. But he was reluctant to go. But when he started collecting dead animals from here and there, taking the brain section, started staining it, and looking beautiful color using the Golgi stain. You can see a lot of beautiful things, cytoplasm stained one way, nucleus has stained another way. That really created a lot of interest for him to go to medical school. And that's the way he studied medicine at Madrid. And these are all the hand-drawn pictures that while looking at under microscope and what are the neuronal connectivity, the axon, dendron, etc. It's a remarkable thing that he's basically father of neurobiology in today's context. So how is the brain connectivity of the universal genius? That is the Leonardo da Vinci. Is the universal genius. And people say that the Leonardo da Vinci's neuronal connectivity was very different. Because this, you can see this is the corpus callosum and these are the two hemispheres of our brain. And his connectivity between those two hemispheres was kind of different kinds of rewiring were there. And whether this rewiring was very different and whether this has any connectivity with this, the Renaissance man or universal genius, how it has, this connectivity created him the universal genius, that we don't know. But apparently his two hemispheres are very much connected and that may have some degree of impact on the creative enterprises of Leonardo da Vinci. So I read one biography by Steve Jobs, and what he says, what is creativity according to Steve Jobs? Creativity is just connecting things. And when you ask creative people how they did something, they feel a little guilty because they don't really do it. They just saw something and it seemed obvious to them after a while. So if you think about Ramanuja, he did a lot of mathematical deductions, but when his professor asked him how he did it, he couldn't explain properly. Probably he had seen something in the dream sequence. I'll talk about a little bit of that. So what is knowledge? Basically, these are the neurons or the nerve cell that in our brain. But this is basically the knowledge. You have lots of information in your brain. But experience is when you are connecting the dots. So you are simply connecting the dots and that is allowed the experience. It's like typical Pavlovian conditioning. You know the Pavlovian conditioning, it's basically conditioning. If there is light, there will be a lot of gastric secretion, etc. So basically you are connecting the neurons and that gives you like the experience. What Steve Jobs said is very interesting. In order us to truly create and contribute, we have to be able to connect countless dots, to cross-pollinate ideas from wealth of disciplines, to combine and recombine and these pieces and build a new castle. So basically you have information, lots of information from the different discipline. And when you are combining and recombining them together, ultimately that gives rise to the creativity, expresses in the form of creativity. So there's a paper published in Brain sometime in I think 2012, whether the creativity, whether it's a disease, what is creativity and art as a symptom of the brain disease, pictures of the neurological tools, lessons from enhanced and emergent artistry in brain diseases. So whether this creativity has anything related to the brain disease, whether some neuronal connectivity is developed and therefore in the later stage of the life, you started developing something new which has not been addressed by you before. So here I come with the two examples. One is Maurice Ravel's composition. Maurice Ravel was a famous French composer, and his composition is a bolero. It's a so this is a one movement orchestra. In this bolero, basically this bolero, and this is next the Canadian biologist Annie Adam. Annie Adam, she was a Canadian biologist, is a professor, and what Annie Adam did, she developed a disease that is called frontotemporal aphasia. It's a kind of some kind of tumor in the brain, and after this, after developing the disease, Annie Adam started to develop new kind of ideas. What she did, she took the bolero's composition and started to visualize this entire musical composition in the artistic creative enterprise. What she did, she really took the different things like it's a rhythmic structure, it's a Spanish dance, rhythmic structure, and 3 counts. So it repeats over and over again. It's a kind of any Eastern or Western classical music. It's basically repetition. It comes repetitive form. So vertical bar is a bar of music, and height equals volume, and color equals pitch, and theme change orange to pink. So entire musical composition of Bolero was really translated in artistic creativity by Annie Adam. After it was developed after she was diagnosed with frontotemporal aphasia. And another interesting thing she did that Emily Dickinson's one of her poem, much madness is divine essence. Whatever is the madness we call, actually whether what they are thinking is correct and what we are thinking, common mass is thinking, maybe incorrect. So much madness is divinest sense, Emily Dickinson. So what Annie Adam did she did the value of pi, that is infinite. So 3 point and it continues. So what Annie Adam did, that it's basically pi is the circumference by diameter, and it continues from 3 point and an infinite number. So Ramanujan probably did some work on the infinite things. Now, what Annie Adam did, she took white, black as 0 and 1, and Vibgyor as 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. The different color she assigned as in a number. Then she took 32 into 46 digits, a matrix of 1471 digits, and expressed it in a kind of each color, each number wanted to put in a different color, and express this value of pi in an artistic creative enterprises. So Annie Adam actually developed this type of thing, and she started creating a lot of interesting things after this disease. As her disease started to progress, she started to create a lot of things artistic, started to express her creative enterprises. So injuries, sometimes injuries to head can lead to cause of advanced intellectual abilities, because some of the concussion of the brain can give rise to new neuronal connectivity, and sometimes that can give rise to different types of intellectual enterprises. And so I'll talk about another interesting person, Daniel Tomet, and he can recite the number to an astonishing 20,514 digits from the memory of these pi values. So he can really talk about continuously about this number 22,514 digits from the memory. So this is called a savant syndrome. Savant syndrome is basically some man or a person who develops some kind of creative activity, which is really difficult to explain in a very ordinary sense. That is called savant syndrome. The question is that whether Ramanujan had suffered that kind of thing or not, whether Mozart had that kind of thing, that how they are kind of so much creative. So whether they had savant syndrome, whether they had some kind of different types of neuronal connectivity. So prodigy versus savant, two sides of the same coin. So this is from the Mozart scores, basically how we can distinguish with the prodigy versus savant. No way we can distinguish it because they're born with this kind of thing, probably different types of neuronal connectivity. And intellectually, they are very different from rest of the people. So illness asks you a question about life and prompt you to write poems. Much madness in divinest sense, Emily Dickinson. So much madness is divinest sense that challenges what's taken as a madness is actually sense. And in order to see, one is to discern at eyes and to think clearly. So what they are thinking, probably whether they are right or wrong, no way you can assess. The sense of society stands because it's agreed by the unthinkable majority. So majority of them, we are not in a position to think that. So therefore, they are kind of probably the creative people. Then normally the creative people, they suffer from bipolar disorders. So it's a kind of associated with it. It was published in American Journal of Psychiatry, 2001. So let us move to the little bit of surrealistic movement that was started by Salvador Dali. And this is Louis Carroll's story of girl who fell down in rabbit hole, held a special fascination of Salvador Dali as Alice's journey into voyage into the subconscious. So Alice is entering into the rabbit hole, and basically she is entering into the world of subconscious, according to Salvador Dali. So surrealistic movements started sometime around 40s, 1940s, and Dali was one of the members of there, and Dept and many other important people were kind of started the surrealistic movement, and they basically tried to get into the imaginative subconscious. Okay, so Dept defined genius in terms of accessibility to this normally untapped realm. So whatever the unconscious or subconscious mind you have, a lot of creative things are there. If we can tap it, probably we can be very creative. Surrealism, a philosophy that embraces literature, music, cinema, popular culture, and science as well. And surrealism is aimed to break down the boundaries of rationalization to access imaginative subconscious. So I read Dali's autobiography. What he did when he was sitting in a chair and trying to get some sleep, and he will put a kind of some spoon below his hand. And when he's falling asleep, probably looking at having some dream sequences or so, the spoon will fall down, it will create noise, he'll wake up and immediately start painting what he had actually seen in his dream sequences. That is the way Dali started to get into his imaginative subconscious and trying to get more into it. And therefore, probably that is the way creative people get into the imaginative subconscious, and that is called the surrealistic movement. The early and mid-century movement in the arts, known as the surrealism, accepts to experience working of the unconscious by fantastic imaginary. Writers and artists give up conscious control of their thoughts and then put down rapidly without interrupting the stream of thoughts of vision, whatever comes to mind. So whatever coming in the mind, they immediately try to put down. And that is the way they started to get into these imaginative subconscious. Salvador Dali, this is Professor Sharma Ochoa and Dali, they were the classmates. They studied together in college. So Professor Ochoa talked about a little bit about Salvador Dali as well, because they are studied together in college. Dali was fascinated with the structure of DNA. And when it was discovered, he paid tribute to Watson and Crick for their wonderful discovery structure of DNA. This is from one of the symposium, and Professor Ochoa, Salvador Dali. And this is according to Dali, the structure of DNA, the double helical structure of DNA. And it came one of the front issue of Nature, on issues of genetics. And you can see some butterflies, and according to him, it's a kind of some life process going on. And this is the structure of double helical structure of DNA. And the butterflies, which basically describes some life process, is on the way. So Dali was very much fascinated with the double helix. And so he was mused that the double helix is the one structure linking man to God. So he thinks that the double helical structure is linking us with the God. And on the right-hand side, you can see that there are riflemen arranged in the form of cubes of death, and their rifle aims to each other's head. You can see also there is the prophet. This is a prophet with a scroll in the hand, and the prophet appears at the top left, holding a scroll inscribed with the title of the painting. According to the Dali's wife is Gala, so he named it galacticidal acidized oxidibunucleic acid. So according to Dali, that is the DNA. And this is the kind of creation and taking him close to the God. And he named it this painting according to, as per his wife, Gala. This is galactosidal acidize oxyribonucleic acid. So that is the name he gave it for this, from this painting. So Mona Lisa of modern science. No molecule in the history of science has reached the iconic status of double helix or DNA. Its image has been imprinted all aspects of society, from science, art, music, cinema, architecture, advertising. The review of Mona Lisa of science examines the evolution its form at the hands of both science and art. So this is the Mona Lisa of modern science. And when we talk about DNA and the inheritance, so three important people are coming. One is the Lamarck, we know the Lamarckian view. Then Charles Darwin and George Mendel. They are basically, before seeing the DNA, they could talk about the inheritance, the problem of inheritance, how it is being inherited. And these are the three important personalities they talked about the inheritance. So here the picture of Lamarck as well as Charles Darwin. So grandma's experience leave a mark on your genes. How it does, I'll talk about a little later. The Darwin and Freud walked into a bar, two alcoholic mice, a mother and her son. The mother mouse says, "Hey genius, tell me how my son got into this sorry state." Bad inheritance, says Darwin. Bad mothering, says Freud. And then in 1992, two young scientists following in Freud's and Darwin's footsteps showed that DNA inside each cell requires something extra to tell which gene to transcribe. So there comes the problem of epigenetics, how environment really controls our expression of gene. And there comes the epigenetics. And epigenetics is a variation that one can cause by changing the DNA sequences. And in layman's term, epigenetics is the study of external factors that turn genes on and off and affect how cells read the genes. So basically, Lamarckian view, Lamarck was basically discredited at that time. But now on and we know that how environment can influences the expression of different types of genes, that is through epigenetics. The epigenetic corrects the adverse early life experiences. And this is one of the painting by one of my students, Momita, and basically how the epigenetics, the relation between father, mother, and child, how that interact, and ultimately how it expresses the different genes. So you can see that this is the DNA, and this is the pattern of methylation in the DNA. And this methylation will dictate which genes will be expressed or not. So the early interaction with the mother or father and their child, this interaction is extremely important for this epigenetic modification. And this is the methylation site. And this methylation, and you can see the difference in methylation in the two helices. And probably that can express in a different way altogether. So different people who have similar experiences might react to this entirely different ways and be affected differently. This is often thought to be due to individuals' DNA and genetic factors. So one of the poem, life is full about tears and fears, yet it has magic to keep us growing. Waves of joy keeps us the torments at bay. Magic of love offers secrets of existence. I feel breeze of love with sense of loyalty, my mother's tender motherhood. Basically, the early childhood encounter probably very important for epigenetic modification and our character development. So this is one kind of thing that I'm very fascinated to look at this face of Mother Mary, so serene, so beautiful, so amazing face of Mother Mary. The sadness of Mary as she holds her dead child, remembering how she holds him years before as a young mother. Profound, emotional, power, compassionate, perfect, embodied in Pieta, the extraordinary beauty of Virgin's face. So it's extraordinary beauty of Michelangelo's creation that's so somber, so beautiful, so amazing face of Mother Mary in this creation. So what epigenetics does actually, basically, this is the DNA and this is the methylation. Again, my student Momita, her view of DNA, and this is the kind of modification that goes on in the DNA, and that is responsible for specific on and off certain gene expression. So if you think about Gurudev and, famous psychoanalyst Sudhir Kakkar, Sudhir looked at all the paintings of Gurudev and tried to get into inner dimension of Gurudev. So he tried to portray the creative genius that shaped him. The death of his mother when he was 14, the intimate bond he shared with sister-in-law Kadambari, his sojourn in England, Kakkar uncovers the vital themes Ian Roby's inner world. So tried to portray all the images that by Sudhir Kakkar, and tried to get into his inner dimension through the paintings, Gurudev's painting. So Sudhir Kakkar published this book a few years ago. Now, if we come to the epigenetics again, that whatever our grandmother, their epigenetic modification had happened because of the environment that grandmother was exposed to, now we know this epigenetic modification can be transmitted, it can be inherited from one to subsequent generation. So again, come to Gurudev. এলে যখন সারাটি নাই গেল চলে জানালো তাই এমন করে আমারে হায় কে বা কাদায় সেজন ভিন্ন আমার ভাঙা পথে রাঙা ধুলোয় পড়েছে কার চরণ চিহ্ন. Basically, Gurudev probably had a visualization that we are inheriting something, because what my grandmother was exposed to, what kind of stress, what kind of things she was exposed to, I do not know, because a lot of epigenetic modification that had happened in her DNA, and it has been transmitted, but it's not in the DNA sequences. So therefore, এলে যখন সারাটি নেই গেল চলে জানালো তাই. But how my grandmother actually exposed to, but I am kind of victim of that because those epigenetic modifications have been inherited. So this is a paper published a few years ago in Nature Neurosciences, very interesting, very fascinating paper, that is the mouse that this mouse is basically taking care of their pups, and this mouse is not taking care of the pups. It's a kind of development of a model of neglect. So in one case, these pups are getting attention of mother, but this pup is not getting attention of mother, and they are kind of model of neglect. And when these pups became the mother, adulthood, interestingly, those mother used to take care of the pup. They are taking care of their pups, and those really develop the model of neglect. They tend to neglect their pups. So therefore, it seems very clear. Then they did a lot of epigenetic modification, etc., which I am not talking about. But basically, it's a glaring example to say that whatever happened in the early childhood, probably through epigenetic modification, probably it is inherited, and therefore, and there are examples to show that epigenetic modification is really inherited. So therefore, what my grandmother did, I'm kind of inheriting it through their epigenetic modification. So what actually our brain is doing it, how our brain is sensing it. So basically, it is what we have actually, this prefrontal cortex and also the limbic system. And these are the two sides probably important for our imagination, thinking, for everything, probably this prefrontal cortex. And if you think in the evolution from gorilla, chimpanzee, and etc., the size of the prefrontal cortex in gorilla, chimpanzee, or in the lower mammals much smaller. But as we come to human being, their prefrontal cortex is much bigger. And this is connected to the limbic system, which is presumably the center for our imagination, thinking, emotion, everything. So lower animals do have a lower frontal cortex. So they have nothing much to think. If they have food for a day, they are very happy. But we think of tomorrow, day after tomorrow, my child, grandchild, and so on. So therefore, it is the frontal cortex, whether we have developed something for creative enterprises, but sometimes it falls back because we think so much, we suffer from depression, anxiety, all kinds of psychological problems, and simply it comes to this frontal cortex. In one sense, we have a frontal cortex to use it for some creative enterprises, but at the same time, also we are inviting some problem, since our frontal cortex can give rise to a lot of issues like mental crisis, depression, etc., etc. So deep inside, terror and horror, ecstasy and joy, entwined in shapeless form, maybe somewhere deep inside, maybe limbic system or frontal cortex, two distinct impulses create human life, unexplainable mystic form. So we have terror, horror, and ecstasy and joy. This kind of everything is embedded in connectivity between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system. So what is the science behind our least understood thought process? Most cognitive skills have biological histories. Their evolution can be traced. But creativity, we cannot really understand the definition. There is no way to define creativity. Monkeys don't paint, chimps don't write poems. Whole genome sequence shows orangutan are closest human relatives, or perhaps about 98% sequence homology in the DNA sequences between gorillas, human, and orangutan. But they don't paint, then they don't write poem, but we do. So again, it comes to our frontal cortex and the limbic system. Our prefrontal cortex is much more developed. And this is the center for all the creative enterprises which we have. So our obsession with ancestry has some twisted root. It's come out very recently on May 2, 2020 in New Yorker, the magazine I read very regularly. So DNA and ancestry now kind of in United States is a kind of getting into this, people trying to understand this ancestry from where I was born. Today, geneticists emerged as authorities on ancestry, replacing blood with DNA. Eugenics to promote human improvement by means of selective breeding. Because in Hitler did lot of eugenics. Okay. So now doing some eugenics, we are really evading the natural selection process. Okay. Whether it is allowed, whether it will be encouraged, that's a different issue altogether. So our laws are poorly prepared to deal with when it comes to privacy, social justice, and national policies. Again, in our case in Rig Veda, describe how gods divided the beings into priests, warrior, merchants, laborers, justifying the development of caste. That really ruined our society by defining and designing all this caste system. And again, if we come to DNA, and that will be another issue to be discussed with. Genetic medicine can invite distinction between deserving and undeserving, pure and polluted. Because by knowing this, you are really inviting more and more trouble if you want to study your ancestry. And if you have a gene, then insurance company will tell you that you have a gene which you are carrying the disease, so it will be out of your insurance. So it will create a lot of problems. So lastly, I come to Upanishad. Arthur Schopenhauer, the German philosopher. So he was very much impressed with Upanishad. The central point to his philosophy, the world is the self-knowledge of the will. So this is kind of thing that we study in Upanishad. It is important to know the signs of human possibilities, and such signs that India sought and found in Upanishad. This is according to Upanishad. And unfortunately, our ignorance is about our potentialities is profound. I think I should stop here. Again, I pay my tribute to legendary scientists, Professor Archana Sharma and Professor Arun Sharma, and thank the organizer for giving me this opportunity. Thank you very much.
Well, we are all mesmerized actually from musings to memories to poetry to music to art to surrealism to neuroscience, DNA, epigenetics, ending with warnings and eugenics. As I told you at the very first, the journey is mesmerizing. We have another important thing to do now. Can I request Professor Anita Mukherjee to felicitate our speaker of the day with a floral bouquet and the plaque?
It's a great privilege for me and also for the foundation to honor such a very best personality. Syamal Roy. Small token of appreciation on our part. As well as corporate.
Can I now request Professor Rita Kundu, Secretary of Archana Sharma Foundation of Calcutta, for the customary vote of thanks.
Thank you, Momita. On behalf of Archana Sharma Foundation of Calcutta, I would like to thank our speaker, Professor Syamal Roy. Despite his busy schedule, he has agreed to come and deliver the wonderful lecture intertwining the beautiful world of arts and science. The experience is beyond the expression of my language. We are really indebted to him. I'd like to thank our respected guests who had graced this occasion, defying the sultry summer afternoon in outside. I also want to acknowledge our head of the department, University of Calcutta, Professor Binay Chobe, for his cooperation to organize the oration in this department. My heartfelt gratitude to all the faculty members for their active participation. I also want to thank all our participants who are attending this program online. Lastly, I would like to thank the scholars and students of this department for their wholehearted participation. And lastly, but not the least, I would also like to thank Mr. Akash Mundal and his team at Braindrops for the technical assistance. So I thank you all. So there is a small announcement. So we have now at the end of our program, and the students, please, there is a small snacks and tea waiting outside. Please, the senior members, you are please requested to go to Professor Arun Kumar Sharma's room to pay your tributes.
So with this, we end the meeting, both online and offline. Thank you everyone for attending the same. Thank you very much.